I want to first of all start with the quick synopsis, and then we'll dive into what we're going to be discussing today. But as we know, this Torah portion is called Miketz, right? And what does Miketz mean? From the end, right? So we're going to see something very, very prophetic here from the end, not just in prophecy, in terms of prophecy, but I really believe in terms of us today. You know, a lot of people like to talk about prophecy. It's not so much about what's going to happen in the future as it is really what is relevant for me today, here, now. Because after all, you do need to live here today. You can't live in the future. You have to be here. So we want to know really how can the Torah portions really helps us as a people today to be able to navigate through this. So the timeline for this portion in Parashat Miketz is actually 9 years. You know, and we notice that each parasha, the years are like usually double digits. You know, they're not normally 2 or 3 days. The time frame is a lot. So the 9 years starts from the Joseph's release from prison, when he actually came out from prison, to Joseph's brother's second trip to Egypt. From that point to that point, there's a 9-year period there that took place. Mitzvahs and observance that we learn in this Torah portion, of course, we're going to learn a lot about teshuvah, repentance. We see something that it's one of the main themes in this portion is repentance, and we see that with the brothers of Joseph as well. So the end of Joseph's imprisonment, the synopsis is the end of Joseph's imprisonment comes with Pharaoh's dream of 7 fat cows that are swallowed up by the 7 lean cows, and 7 fat ears of grain that are swallowed by the 7 lean ears of grain. And Joseph is summoned from prison to interpret the dream. Now we're going to see something very beautiful. Why this dream? Why the cows? Why the fat cows? And why the lean cows eating the fat cows? Well, people will say, well, that's the famine. But there's more to just the famine. There's actually a message in here that is very, very powerful that runs throughout all Tanakh, by the way. Joseph predicts the 7 years of plenty will be followed by the 7 years of famine, and advises Pharaoh to preserve grain during the plentiful years for the years of the famine, of course. Pharaoh appoints Joseph as, the king of Egypt. Joseph marries Asenath, and the children are born to then Manasseh and Ephraim. Okay. Now, the whole thing with the dream, again, why is it important to dig a little bit more deeper into the dream? Because we're going to find out later in Tanakh that there's a very similar case that takes place in another story that actually correlates to this story right here with Joseph. Famine spreads through the region, and the food can be obtained only in Egypt at this point. Keep that in mind. This is very, very important. Why? Because from the end, we see something that's going to happen prophetically in the future. So the place where we're going to go, the place in this case in the story here is talking about Egypt. 10 brothers of Joseph come to Egypt to purchase provisions. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. So why is it that they don't recognize him? Well, if we read in the Torah portion, Joseph no longer looks like a Jewish man. Joseph looks like an Egyptian. As a matter of fact, it says that when he came out of the prison, this is a Tanakh, this is not tradition. Tanakh says that when he came out of the prison, they shaved him completely, right? And, to operate with the courts of Pharaoh, you really have to look Egyptian. Let's put it that way. So he was no longer the long-bearded man, who looked really, really like a wilderness man. He now looks, matter of fact, says the linen clothes were put on him, this is royalty and prestige in the land of Egypt. 99.9% chances is Joseph wore makeup, as it was the custom of the Egyptians. They had to wear makeup. You know what I mean? His hair probably would have been, shaved completely. He would not look like a Hebrew. Let's put it that way. Joseph looked 100% Egyptian. And this is the reason why when his brothers come, they can't recognize him. This is also another prophetic picture of what will happen in the future. You see? Why? Because, the 10 tribes of Israel, we know there's 12 tribes, 10 tribes have been scattered everywhere. And what do they look like now? Well, they look like everybody else, depending what region you're in. You know what I mean? And it's just so beautiful. I love this because we see something very, very amazing that's going to happen. So they don't recognize him, of course, which is understandable. He accuses them of being spies, essentially. Joseph accuses his brothers of being spies at this point. He imprisons Simeon as a hostage and insists that they bring Benjamin, whom Jacob left, kept at home, to prove their innocence in essence. Returning to Canaan, the brother discovered that the money they paid for the provision had been mysteriously returned to the sacks. So this is a problem now, because now it's like, okay, they're going to think we're thieves, right? Jacob agrees to send Benjamin to Egypt with the brothers only after Judah assumes personal and responsibility for him. The time Joseph receives them graciously invites them to dine at his home, but then he plants his silver goblet in Benjamin's sack. Joseph does this purposely. The brothers set out to go the next morning. Joseph sends the overseer of his house to pursue them, search their sack, arrest them when the goblet is actually discovered. So he sets the brothers up for failure in essence. And now what happens is Benjamin is left behind as a slave. Wow, this is amazing. This is pretty much a quick synopsis of the whole entire portion because it ends there. Benjamin as a slave in essence, you see. But really, what is Joseph doing in here? Well, we got to realize this is the power of the Teshuvah. You know, Joseph is really wanting to see, how long it's been since he's seen his brothers? Like 20-something years. So, have they changed? Remember, this is the whole point. Joseph remembers what the brothers did to him. And he was the youngest. So now, Benjamin is the youngest among them. So, what is he doing? He's testing them to see whether or not they really have changed, to see what kind of brothers do I have right now? Who are they in essence? So the parasha opens up by saying, Vayehi Miketz shanataim ayamim, it says. And it says, and it was at the end of the 2 years. The Torah portion opens up with this very, very prophetic theme in Judaism. It's very well known. At the end of the Miketz, in essence, represents something very prophetic concerning the Messianic age. And I want to share something with you. The Ari says that the word Miketz at the end is a reference to the Messianic end of days in essence. As Joseph's individual redemption is representative of also the universal redemption that will happen in the world. So we've seen a redemption that's going to take place here for Joseph, but that, again, is an allegory also for the future time where there will be a wider redemption for the whole world. Sforno goes on to say, when the time came for Joseph's imprisonment to end, right, he was rushed from the pit. If you guys read, he was taken immediately, it says. After Pharaoh had this dream, they rushed him out of the pit because they remember, hey, there's a Hebrew slave in the prison who actually gives very good predictions. You know what I mean? So they remember this. And they say, why don't we try him? Oh, what do we have to lose at this point? And Pharaoh was so bothered by this dream. He kept having this dream. So Pharaoh knew that there was something prophetic to what he was dreaming. He just couldn't figure out what it was. So what happens is, according to the Sforno, that they rush him out of the pit. And we read that in 41:14. Okay. So as not to delay his redemption even for a single moment, it says. So it was when the children of Israel left Egypt also, we're going to read later in the book of Exodus, right? What happened? It will be the future redemption. And how did the redemption come? In haste. See? And how does Joseph taken out of the pit? In haste. All in haste. For everything has to be, or has its precise moment when it has to occur. The Sforno says. So this portion really deals a lot with the prophetic picture of the redemption of the world in the future. We see that in the person of Joseph, but I want to elaborate a little bit more. How many of you would love to see the final redemption? I think we all do, right? How many of you would like to see a redemption in your own life? Because you see, you don't have to wait for a future for that. And the whole message of Miketz really, you're going to find out the whole message of Miketz really has to do with your personal redemption. It's not, we have a misunderstanding of what redemption is. We really, truly do. We look at redemption as something external, when in reality, redemption is something internal that later reflects in the external. You see what I mean? So it starts individually. You don't have to wait. I always hear people say, we can't wait for Mashiach to come. Well, great. But what is that going to do for you today? There are chances that you're going to die before Mashiach comes. Just telling you right now. It's going to level with you. 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years, people have been waiting for Mashiach. Second temple period, they were waiting for Mashiach. First temple period, they were waiting for Mashiach. In both temple periods, they were waiting for Mashiach. Here in the today and the now, this is what God is teaching us. Your redemption, it's so close to you right now. But we can't see it. Why? Because we have blinders. And here we're going to see, and what I mean by blinders, unfortunately, misleading of understanding what really the Jewish scripture is trying to teach us in essence. So the redemption I want to share with you guys right here today is something that you can experience here, the now, and the today. So what happens? Pharaoh has this dream, and we're going to touch a little bit on this redemption. We're going to see how this redemption works and how we can actually experience a redemption today. Okay? So you all know that the land of Egypt was a very, very prosperous land, right? As a matter of fact, the Nile River was there. It actually had a canal that they harvest this canal to be able to irrigate the whole land. So in reality, the land didn't even need rain, to be honest with you. I mean, it's good to get rain, but they really technically didn't even need the rain because they had so much, the resources from the Nile in itself was so great that the land was so lush and green and beautiful, and there was just an abundance of everything in the land of Egypt. Hear me out, please. When I said that there was an abundance in Egypt, I'm not exaggerating you. It was the land that everybody wanted to go to. So if you can think of the most richest place today, the most abundant place today in the earth right now as we stand, that most people will want to go, that will be it. And I'm not talking spiritual people because I know you're going to say Israel. But in reality, it's not Israel. In terms of logistics and land, not necessarily. Spiritually, yes, Israel is the land. But there are by far more places that are so beautiful as well, that are very rich in soil and everything. You know what I mean? That we can really, really go on a rabbit trail with this. But so now what happens is that we see that there's a dream that Pharaoh has, and this dream continues to bother him. And of course, it has to do with the plush cows. But then there's the very, very skinny cows that eat up the fat cows. This is Pharaoh's dream. Over and over, he has this dream. He's disturbed by this. But it is in that dream that God is revealing the essence of the redemption for every human being. Because you see, what Pharaoh is dealing with in here is essentially what every human being struggles with every single day. I will submit to you. We're going to see. I want to share again the words of our great our sages. But before we do that, we know that he has the dream, right? And actually, verse 41:30 says, "And 7 years of famine will arise after them, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will annihilate the land," it says. "And the plenty will not be known in the land in the face of that famine afterwards. And it is exceedingly heavy," he says. And regarding the repeating of the dream twice to Pharaoh, because it happened twice, because the matter is ready from with God, and God is hastening to do it. Meaning, don't sit back too comfortable, because this is going to happen here like real soon. You know what I mean? And now Pharaoh should see, this is Joseph speaking to Pharaoh, and now Pharaoh should see an understanding and wise man. He should set over the land of Egypt, and Pharaoh should act, it says in here. Two things Pharaoh should do, he says. Pharaoh should act, and he should appoint appointees over the land, and he should rally the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty, he says. And they should collect all the food of the good years, these that are coming. And they should stock grains under the hand of Pharaoh food in the cities, and they should keep it. So now Joseph proposes something very interesting. Most people will never pick this up, but I want to elaborate here today in really what he is proposing to Pharaoh. And we're going to really make this connection with another scripture here that's going to mind blow you here. But let's first start with when it says in here that Pharaoh should act. That's the first thing Joseph tells Pharaoh. Pharaoh should act, and there's an and there, so there's two things. And not only should he act, but he shall appoint appointees over the land. What's happening there? What is it that he's saying? So I want to take us to the Rabbi Abraham Sabah. Says that Pharaoh should act. Just say that Pharaoh should act first and contribute 1/5 of his own wealth. In other words, starts with Pharaoh. Pharaoh has to do this first before anybody in the land does this. Why? Because who's the ruler of Egypt? Pharaoh. So Pharaoh needs to lead by example. This is what Joseph is saying. If you don't do it, don't expect the people to do it. Because the people are only going to be as good as the leader is. So I need you to set this apart from your wealth, from your own wealth, to the reserves of the years of the famine, it says. If Pharaoh will personally set the example, then the populace will be more than ready to cooperate with the plan, in essence. We see now the wisdom of Joseph in here. He's saying, let's start with you, Pharaoh. You're going to do this, and you're going to one who's going to get it going. It says, you shall appoint appointees over the land, and he should rally the land of Egypt. Now, what does he talk about when he says rally the land of Egypt? What is that meaning of that? See, these are the little details in the Torah that are very, very important for us to understand so we can understand what we're reading, right? And I wanna, it says, let me look it up in here. Okay, here we go. Veyafket, it says, Pekidim al ha'eretz vechimesh et eretz Mitzrayim, it says. When it says that he shall rally the land, the word that is used there for rally literally is the word chimesh in Hebrew. What does that word mean? To rally. But what's the shoresh for chimesh? So let me ask you all this. How many of you have a chumash? There you go. Chumash. Chimesh, the same wording, the same letters. 5. 1/5. When it talks about the rally of the land, is that you to collect 1/5 of all the produce from the land. But why 1/5? Out of all the numbers, why Chimesh? See, learning the Torah, learning the sacrificial services, all this we'll learn to see and read into this. Because a Chimesh, a 5th, literally represents tzedakah, meaning charity. What is Joseph telling Pharaoh? If you want to save the land, give charity. Where do we read this also? I'll take you here. See, the stories now will start making connections and you start seeing where they come from. Because now we're going to find out here that this righteous man called Daniel said the exact same thing. Daniel actually counseled Nebuchadnezzar because Nebuchadnezzar had 2 dreams of the exact same dreams, and it was a prophetic message of what was going to happen to Babylon. See, when you start making the connections, now you can see, wow, here it is. What is Joseph doing is exactly what Daniel's doing. And I will take you to Daniel chapter 4, for instance. And really, you want to start reading, and I'll start just for the sake of time in here. I'll start in 17. The tree that you saw, because Nebuchadnezzar saw this tree, and this angel came and destroyed it completely. It's a beautiful tree. He was so bothered by this. So now he needs an interpreter. And lo and behold, guess who's there to interpret? Daniel. Just like Joseph is there to interpret for Pharaoh, who's the king. You've seen the connection already. And it says in here, the tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens, and which was visible to the entire earth, whose foliage was beautiful, and whose fruit plentiful, with food for all. Food. There you go. Same thing that's happening in Egypt. Plenty, food, but now there's going to be a famine. So in here it says, for food for all, under which dwell the beasts of the field, in whose branches nested the birds of the heaven. It is you, O king, he says, who have grown and become powerful. Your greatness has grown and reached to the sky, and your dominion to the end of the earth. And that which the king saw, a holy angel came down from heaven and said, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its major root in the ground, with a band of iron and copper and a herbage of the field. It will be washed by the dew of heaven, and its lot will be with the beasts of the field. Until 7 periods pass over. That's 7 again. This is the interpretation, O king. It is a decree of the Supreme One that befalls my Lord the king. They will drive you from mankind, and your dwelling will be among the beasts of the field. He's telling Nebuchadnezzar, basically, you're going to grow insane. You're going to get crazy, and you're going to go and live like an animal with the beasts, essentially. Now, this is a king, I will remind you. He's telling this king, you're going to go Meshuggah, in other words. And that's it. You're done. So he's saying in here, your dwelling will be among the beasts of the field. They will feed you grass like oxen, and wash you with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods will pass over you, until you recognize that the Supreme One rules over the kingdom of man, and he gives it to whomever he wishes. As to that which they set to leave the major roots in the tree, your kingdom will remain for you after, that's why the roots remain, after you recognize that heaven rules, essentially. Nevertheless, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you, says Daniel. Now here's where it's mind-blowing, because this is what Daniel says to the king. Is there any way that we can stop this from happening, this decree? Yes. There is a path in here. And Daniel tells them, redeem your sin, he says. Meaning, you can atone for your sin. It doesn't have to go down this way. You can make a change in your life today. This is what Hashem tells us every single day. Redeem your sins right now, today. He says, redeem your sins through righteousness and your iniquities through charity to the poor. There you go. What is the word for charity? It's tzedakah, which is 1/5. You see? So he's saying in here, redeem this through through charity to the poor. Perhaps there will be an extension to your tranquility, to your peace. And of course, we see this in here that, Nebuchadnezzar obviously listens, and the kingdom is restored to him. Later he becomes haughty and is taken away. He really goes crazy. And he's sent out into the field to live like animals for 7 years. But we see in here that that same concept that's happening with Joseph in here and his brother, with Joseph and Pharaoh, it's the same concept that took place with Nebuchadnezzar. So why I say this? Because the connection in here that our rabbis make, it is so amazing. And I want to share this whole aspect with you. It says that the food shall be a reserve for the land. In verse 36, when he says they should collect all the food for the good years that are coming, and they should stock grain under the hand of Pharaoh, food in the cities, and they should keep it, and the food shall be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of the famine. What does that mean in here? So I want to share this. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says this. Allegorically, Pharaoh's dream, why he had that dream, in the same way that I believe the king of Babylon had the same dream, Pharaoh's dream represents the destructiveness of greed. We're going to see something very interesting about this. King Solomon proclaims, one who loves money is never satiated with money, ever. I believe this speaks in volume. This is so true. We see that very evident in the world. Like the evidence is overwhelming, let's put it that way. In the words of the sages, one who has 100 silver coins desires 200. One who has 200 coins desires 400, right? This is the way it goes. The 7 fat cows are the riches which God bestows upon the wealthy. That's why the cows are very lush and very, very fat, right? So it's the wealth. As a matter of fact, there's a scripture in the Tanakh that says that Ephraim grew what? Fat. You see what I mean? And this is in Hosea. It's talking about the wealth of Ephraim. Ephraim became so wealthy that in essence it turned against God because now it became an idol for them. You see what I mean? So the 7 fat cows are the riches which God bestows upon the wealthy. The 7 lean cows, however, check this out, are the lust for money. The fat cows is the actual growth and the wealth. The lean cows is the fuel and the desire for the money in essence, they say. So they say the 7 lean cows are the lust for the money, which consumes everything a person has and remains as hungry as before. This is very beautiful because when you really think about it, that lust for money, that desire in this case, what it leaves you with, it leaves you empty. See, this is why the land will be consumed. You getting this? In other words, it's an allegory of Pharaoh's heart, but not just Pharaoh, even the people of Egypt in itself. What's Egypt? Egypt has so much resources that at this point, all the resources that they have really means nothing. The people are taking everything for granted in essence and not appreciating the very minimum at least. So it says in here that because of this lust, the lust is equated to the hungry cows who always want more. In Pharaoh's words to Joseph, and they came into the inwards, it says, innards, and it was not known that they had come into the innards, and their appearance was bad as it was in the beginning. So how does one break the cycle of greed, they say? How does that work? That's when they say, with charity. That's why the solution for this was what? The 5th, Hamishesh. See? When we use our wealth to help the needy, we transform our money from a source of anxiety and discontent into a source of blessing and fulfillment. Fulfillment is the key, folks. And I cannot stress the importance of fulfillment. Because I believe what lacks from most of us today, it's fulfillment. See, most people desire more and more and more because the desire of more, it is a belief that if you have more, this is what the Yetzer Hara does. If you have more, then you'll be fulfilled. But it turns out to be a lie. It's not about having more that keeps you fulfilled. And this is what Joseph is going to impart to Pharaoh to make him understand. So this is where it gets very, very interesting. Thus, Joseph's advice to Pharaoh alludes to many of the laws of charity. The imperative to appoint appointees over the land reflects the obligation incumbent on every community to appoint trustees to collect and distribute charity to the needy. Joseph collected a 5th part of the produce, alluding to the law that a person should give up 1/5 of his earning to charity as well. The food and the field of the city he put within it reflects the law that in giving charity to the poor of your own city takes precedence over the poor of another city. They're going on to the extension starting where you're at. That's why it says he appointed people within each province within Egypt to take care of this. And by the way, we see this same platform that Joseph is using in here. It's actually the same one that is used in the Torah for the 12 tribes of Israel. Every tribe had a providence, and they had a leader within that providence that will make sure that the affairs of that community will be taken care of. So he's using a Torah concept and applying it in here in a time, in a situation that was very much so needed. And this is what makes this part so amazing and so great. The idea in here is the fulfillment. So now what happens is Pharaoh says, this man is extremely what? Wise in essence. Like, who can we find another one like him, this says. Now, why would he say that? At the same time, here's a token. According to Hazal, The reason why he said this is because Pharaoh knew a lot of people who were very spiritual. By the way, Egypt was a very spiritual place. Contrary to popular belief, it was very, very spiritual. But he's saying most of these spiritual people, they basically are hermits. They recluse themselves. They don't want to be bothered with people. They're so overly spiritual people that they. How can we find one who actually goes out, is in the government, who presents himself so well, yet has the ability to communicate with God? And this is kind of going back to what we were talking about in the last three portions of not being so overly righteous to the point where you cannot be useful for the world. You ever met people that are so righteous they don't even come out of their little circle, and that's it, and they don't want to interact with the world. Here we see that this is not good. As a matter of fact, Solomon said it's not good. But we see the evidence in here. Even Pharaoh says, how can we find another one like this one? Are you kidding me? We cannot let this one go. The next time we don't know how long it's going to be before we find another righteous person who actually is not holier than thou, who can come out of his circle and who can help the community, who can help, in this case, the whole nation. He says that this is a man who is obviously wise. There is none understanding as wise as you, he says. But what is the word for wise? Or rather wisdom? Hebrew is chokhmah, right? But what does chokhmah represent? According to the Zalman of Liad, he says chokhmah is the ability to conceive ideas, in essence. See? Joseph, it's one thing to know Torah, but now it's another thing to how can I use these ideas, these Torah concepts, and present them in a very applicable way in the world that we live in today. See? So the ability to conceive ideas is wisdom. He said that he also has understanding. What is the representation of understanding? It's binah in Hebrew. What is binah? Binah is the ability to analyze, to break a concept down to its component parts, compare and contrast concept with each other, and deduce one concept from another. That's essentially binah, understanding. Now, bear in mind, you have to have Torah knowledge. Now, with Torah knowledge, now you have to apply these concepts. Like, how do I apply these concepts for my own life? Because remember, we're talking here for what? A deliverance. Deliverance for your own life, folks. Requires for you to be able to have the ability to conceive these ideas and to be able to contrast them and compare them. But then it says that you also have knowledge. Joseph had knowledge as well, which is the Hebrew word for da'at. And the Ladia says that da'at is the ability to apply what has been conceived and understood to make it personal and real. Yes. You see, this is a very, very meticulous process, folks. Don't take this lightly, I'm telling you. It's not a cool teaching. It's an actual tool that I'm sharing with you guys today to help you with your own personal deliverance. But it starts with knowledge of Torah. And from that knowledge, now you have to break it down into these three segments in order to be able to bring what? Deliverance in your life. Because here's the thing. Remember that we want to stay in the theme. The theme in here has to do with the deliverance that's going to take place. So, what happens is Pharaoh goes along with the plan. Everything is executed. Says Joseph went before Pharaoh and he traversed all the land of Egypt. And the land produces, says, in the 7 years of plenty in handfuls. And he collected all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and he put food in the cities, essentially. The food of the field of the city which surrounds it, he put in his midst. And Joseph stocked grains as the sand of the sea, exceedingly much. This is a terminology that should be ringing in your head right now. Why did the Torah use the terminology as the sand of the sea? You should know this. Because the prophet says, talking about the land of the tribe of Ephraim, the Ephraim will be what? One who cannot be numbered as the sand of the seas. See? And who is in here? Joseph. Joseph is the father of Ephraim. See? This is beautiful. So it's saying we can really, really thrash on this, because when it says that Joseph stocked grain as the sand of the sea, Joseph is collecting all the grain as the sand of the sea. Just like in the latter days, all the tribes of Israel will be collected, and they will be so numerous, they will be like the sand of the sea. See? It's a very beautiful analogy there. Until he desisted from counting, and there was no number, says. And to Joseph was born 2 children now. This gets really interesting. When the year of the famine was yet to come, who were born into him by Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. And Joseph called the name of his firstborn Manasseh, as God has made me forget all my toil. Right? But what's striking, and I don't know if you picked up on this, that's kind of odd, is what it says afterwards. I mean, I can understand forgetting your pain. I mean, who wants to remember that pain, right? But it says in here, as God has made me forget all my toil and all the house of my father. That's interesting. Joseph says not only did he forget all his toil, but he forgot all the house of his father. And I want to zero in this because this is actually very, very beautiful. A little touching, but it's amazing. So, the Al-Shish actually shares a commentary here that is very profound that we must ask. Okay? Why would Joseph celebrate the fact that he has forgotten his father's home? It's a good question. Oh, it is in here in the Torah. It's actually in the written Torah, right? One might also ask this, and this is and I want you guys to think about this. Why would Joseph, or rather, one might also ask, is it not strange that Joseph did not send a message to his father when he was a servant in Potiphar's house? Anybody ever asked that question? Why didn't Joseph send a message to Jacob to let him know, hey, Dad, I'm alive? After all, he is in Potiphar's house. He has favor by Potiphar. I mean, he could do this at this point. He has the ability to do this. But yet, he never does that. Why? Lama. It's a good question. Or even during the 12 years that he was in prison, I'm sure he had time to write a letter while he was 12 years in prison, right? Yet, no letter to that. Certainly, his father would have paid any sum of money to redeem him while he was in prison. Could that be true? Absolutely. Father would have done it. Nor did Joseph contact his father during the 7 years of plenty. How about now? I mean, he's like the big honcho in Egypt. He didn't send anything to his dad to let him know, hey, I'm here alive, Dad, you know. Things that make you go, right? But here's the thing. It says in here, the Al-Shish says, but Joseph understood that there was a divine purpose in all that occurred to him at this point. He knew that he was sent to Egypt to serve as a vehicle for the divine presence and preparation for the exile of Israel in that land, in essence. You guys remember the dream that Joseph had? Which actually was the dream that got him in trouble? Because he shared with his brothers, your sheep is going to bow down to mine. You know what I mean? All of this now is starting to somewhat make sense to Joseph as to why this long journey of exile that he's been in essence. We could just imagine that when this started, Joseph must have been extremely confused as to why this was happening. Because at the very moment, none of it makes sense. At the very moment, it was all despair and it all seems hopeless. But now he starts to see this. He also understood that the time had not yet come to summon his family to Egypt. All those years, there were a struggle within Joseph's heart between his yearning for his father's home and embrace and his dedication to the mission that was entrusted to him. You know, his father's house, when it talks about he forgot his father's house, what does the father's house represents? The teachings, the community, being around your community, being around like-minded people, all of that inclusively, the nurturing that comes with that, the uplifting that comes with that as well, the encouragement that comes with that as well, right? He didn't have it. This is why Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, to express his gratitude to God that he has succeeded in his struggle to suppress. Listen to this. Joseph had to suppress his yearning for his father's home. Because if he would have not suppressed his yearning for his father's home, he would have come out of the other end of this bitter and angry and possibly deny God in the process. Joseph used wisdom to say, I'm going to suppress that longing to want to be with my father's home, with my community, because I know that in this exile, there's a reason, and I'm a vehicle for a reason. That's beautiful. He says that he ends in here, the Ali says that he succeeded in his struggle to suppress his yearning for his father's house and followed the course which divine providence had ordained for him, in essence. What do we see in the life of Joseph? And by the way, this is all coming back to, we're gonna revisit this again in coming back to deliverance. There's a deliverance that's taking place, that's going to take place here in the land of Egypt in this story. We don't find it here in this parasha, but we will in the next one. And remembering that the dream has to do with the cows, suppressing our desires and our wants, folks. Because deliverance literally means to set you free from the shackles of your mind. You can live in the midst of the exile and literally be free. But what imprisons us the most, it's really our own mindset. Pharaoh and the land, they had so much that they couldn't see. Here, Joseph tells them, give the charity, suppress the hunger, so that you can actually see a deliverance in the future. What's interesting is that after all this happened, and the whole thing is that unfortunately, through the desires of Pharaoh, it came through what? It came at the expense of what? Of the slaves. The whole land is enslaved. Why? Because Pharaoh's desires, in essence. Not necessarily Pharaoh's needs, but Pharaoh's desires, in essence. And Joseph is seeing this and saying, we have to do something. And, the thing about it is that this deliverance that takes place, we read later that after that, everything was good. The aspect of the desires had, in essence, been kindled out. The fire's been put out for desires and wants. Now Israel and the rest of the nations were at ease. There was peace in the land. It took another Pharaoh in the book of Egypt and the book of Exodus to rise up to say, wait a minute, these people are multiplying too much. We're going to read that when we start the book of Exodus. But prior to that, it was good. As a matter of fact, Jacob can come now to Egypt. Provisions are made. Everybody's provided for. You see what's happening in here. This is actually alluding to the Messianic age. Everybody's provided for. No one is hungry. All the needs are met. But what it took relinquishing that mindset through the dreams that God gave to Pharaoh so he can understand this. Our deliverance can take place here today, folks. Today. Stop dreaming about some future. That's going to come, but it starts with you. The saddest thing is for you to die and die in prison in your own mind. For me, I'd rather die free. And that's what this Torah portion is calling us, Miketz, from the end. From the end, deliverance will come. That end, of course, Messianic age, but that end can also mean your end. When are you going to wake up and to say, today is the end? Today I choose to let the lean cows eat the fat cows and quench my desires because I want to set my mind free. I want to be free. So, what happens is he suppresses everything. Joseph suppresses everything that his father's house was very, very dear to him, as should be dear to us as well. He suppresses his desires for these things in order to accomplish something greater. There is a wisdom that's being shared in here as well. We need to suppress our desires. If we want to accomplish a mission and really essentially accomplish something that is very positive for us, we need to suppress the negative traits that we're carrying in essence. Because if we don't suppress those things are going to continue to hunt us down. And what ends up happening, we end up being mad at God. See? Well, again, you'll grow bitter. So now comes Manasseh, but now he says, and the second came, and he called him Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of affliction. In the land, in the place where I was a slave, God has made me fruitful. It coincides with Manasseh, because in Manasseh, he has to suppress in order to be fruitful. You seeing this? That's why the names back to back is perfect. One suppresses so that the other one can be fruitful. And I want to share in here the writings of the Rebbe. It says exile, which is where every one of us is in right now. It's where they were at that time in Egypt. It says exile deprives us of our home. Is that true? Absolutely. The environment that preserves our faith, nourishes our growth, and spurs our achievements. Exile, unfortunately, deprives you from all of those things. Anybody been to Israel here? It's beautiful. And if you've been to Israel and you walk in those communities, it's so beautiful because you see the Torah life. It's so good that you can go and walk the path where Abraham walked and walk in the city and walk through the Western Wall. I mean, these are all historical places that carry so much rich meaning for each and one of us who believes in the God of Israel. Synagogues with Torah scrolls, authentic old synagogues with Torah scrolls. Yeshivas left and right for learning and growth. The exile deprives us from that nourishment. By the way, it should be the desire of each and one of us to long for that, not to stay in the exile. The exile is not good. But we understand that there's a job that needs to be done now. But we don't want to be like the Jews from Babylon who at the end of the 70 years didn't want to leave. This is the reminder. Our home is not here, folks. We should not be complacent where we're at. We should always strive for greatness. So it says in here, but by depriving us of all these, it compels us to turn inward to the innermost reaches of our soul and to extract from there reserves of commitment and determination never tapped in more tranquil times. In other words, what he's trying to say in here is that because you are in the exile, for a lot of people who have husbah, it literally prompts us to actually seek deeper. Why? Well, because in home, we have so much support. At home, we have the nourishment and the support of others who are doing the same thing, walking the same walk. When you're in exile and you're deprived from these things, you have to muster it up now because there's nobody next to you to encourage you. That's the whole point of having community, is to encourage you. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's always viewed as a good thing. To study in the yeshiva, you always have a partner to study with. I mean, it's an accountability that's healthy and it's good and it serves for growth. But in the exile, you don't have that. Therefore, two things happen. Either you grow cold completely and abandon the faith, ultimately leads to that, or you, as it says in here, you search deeper within you and pull this out to carry it on for the next generation. This is one positive function of exile, the Rebbe says. In addition, exile broadens our horizons as well, bringing us into contact with circumstances and experiences we never would have encountered at home. That's now here's the other coin of that. The exile serves as a good purpose as that as well, because there are situations that you're going to run into the exile that typically you won't run again when you are home within a community essence. Many of these are negative circumstances and experiences contrary to our native values. But everything in God's world possesses a positive potential, he says. When we learn to resist and reject the negative aspects of these alien elements, we can then redeem the sparks of holiness in this world. This is beautiful. You follow what he's saying? To resist and reject the negative aspects. Part of that has to do with our desires and our greed. That's one aspect of it. But also the negative alien aspects that we find and encounter while we're in exile that we have to overcome. So we can then redeem the sparks of holiness they harbor by utilizing the essence towards good and godly ends at the end. Joseph in Egypt experienced two stages in the positive exploitation of exile. In naming his first son Manasseh, meaning forgetting, Joseph referred to his struggles in an environment intent on eradicating all memory of home and roots, and celebrated how his battle against forgetting and disconnection uncover his deepest potential at the same time. Joseph would have never encountered the potential that he really had if he would have remained in Canaan. Never, ever would he have dreamed that he'd be running an entire world. By the way, it was not just Egypt, folks. It was the whole world. There was people coming from everywhere because the famine was worldwide. It was not just Egypt. That's why the Torah portion is very prophetic for the latter days. So this is something that, wow, if you wanted anything, you need to go to Joseph, essentially. Do you know the honors in that? This is a man who is a Hebrew, a lad, they say, which is a derogatory term, who's in the prison for 12 years. How can he save the world? Through wisdom. You see? Through understanding and wisdom. And the same thing is for you in your life, folks. In your life today, how can you bring redemption to your life? One of the gifts that God has given us is the ability to be able to redeem yourself. The ability to be able to create. The ability to rise to your highest potential. That is the gift of God, by the way. His second son, Ephraim, so named because God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, represents the second dividend of exile, the manner in which a land of affliction is exploited as a source of growth and productivity, in essence. We can make this land, your life today, where you are today, the circumstances that you're in, your location, into a place of fruitfulness, which is what Ephraim means, to be fruitful. Be fruitful in where you are today. Be fruitful in your life. Be fruitful in the things that you do outside of the sphere of your home. And all that can only come through one aspect and one aspect only, and that is through the suppression of our desires. Redemption is a beautiful thing, folks. We find in here that Joseph brought redemption to a whole land. Charity was the key. Charity was the key. Suppressing the desires was the tool to achieve this. If every single one of us, not here, but worldwide, were to practice this, were to do this, think about how the world would look. There will never be a hungry person in the world at this point. Everybody will be provided for. And that's what the Messianic age is going to bring, by the way. What is the Messianic age going to do? That's so different than we don't have now. You're not going to find the struggles that we find today. Why? Because the whole purpose of mankind is always to feed his lust. What the Messianic age is going to bring us is the ability to quench that. And that's really when the final deliverance will come. So we cannot practice, folks, and we cannot ask God for deliverance if we ourselves are not willing to quench those desires that we have. And start like what Joseph said to Pharaoh. Act, meaning it starts with you. Pharaoh should act. God is telling each and one of us, you need to act. Just like Pharaoh needed to act, you need to act. This is a model of how a whole nation changed, by the way. It started with one guy called Pharaoh. He changed. He acted. And now a whole region and essentially a whole world became saved. So is this possible today? Absolutely. What it takes is suppression of the past, suppression of the longing for things that really we don't need, per se. And remembering that you are where you are today because God divinely has you here. Bottom line, there's no other element to that. If God is God and we believe that he is God and he exists and he's not an imaginary friend for adults, then you are where you are because God has you there. So make the best out of it. If God has me here and this is my situation, let me be like Joseph. Let me use wisdom now, understanding, to decipher all this, to be able to navigate through all this, to make the best out of it. So that I can be a redemption for my life and for my children as well. And that is the message of Miketz from the end. And I pray that today each and one of us will do a Miketz. We will have an end today. To say, today I choose to walk in redemption. Today I choose not to be bitter. Today I choose to accept the parameters that God has given me, the tools that he has given me to make what needs to be made. And like Pharaoh, I need to act. And how fast should we do this? The redemption came in haste. Every single time. Joseph was pulled out of the jail in haste. The final redemption will be in haste. The redemption of Egypt was in haste. Your redemption today, don't sleep on it. Don't ponder it. In haste. Move. Move. Don't wait. Let's do it today. Let's do it now. Let's act so that we can experience a redemption today. And by example, leading others into a redemption. May Hashem bless you and keep you. Thank you, guys. All right? Thank you.